All right, we are live.
Okay.
Let's
Hi.
see. Well, wait. It says starting.
Okay.
We're not live.
Let me find us. I gotta see it.
I need someone to get on to tell me if I'm quiet, because I don't remember what I did to fix that last time. Now we are live.
Okay. I think you're slightly quieter than me. Let's both talk for a second.
I am talking for a second in
And
order to determine whether I am quiet or not.
and I am also talking, and I'm going to listen to both of our voices happen. We sound exactly the same to me, so
Oh, perfect. Perfect. There's nobody here.
it's fine. No, there's 6 watching.
Wait, what?
It says 6 watching on what I'm looking at.
Well, then my thing doesn't work. Oh, there we go. Mine's just slow. Never mind.
5
Hi.
watching.
Oh, we lost one
No, we
already.
lost- oh, no, shit.
Shit.
This isn't going well.
Hey guys that are watching, you can say hi in chat if you want, or not.
They haven't heard us yet. New subscribers.
Hey, it's Lupin.
Yeah.
Lupin who picked this book. Good. I was wondering if the person who picked this book was going to be here. Hey Connor,
Hi. Hi, everybody.
and Dark Glass is here. So we have people listening on YouTube. We also have people, our patrons, listening via YouTube but talking in our Discord chat. So that we have Dark Glass here on Discord. Hello. All right. So I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Yeah. Let me pull up the thing with the stuff on it.
Oh yeah, that thing. The notes. Those are kind of important.
Yeah.
Did you see the? I made a. There's a Word doc and
I
there's.
saw.
Okay. So you guys listening on the stream and seeing us live get to see us work through this behind the scenes nonsense.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, I am recording this as well as the recording that's happening right now, but I don't think I need you to do record for this.
Okay.
I don't think.
I will not.
All right.
Yeah, I'm good to go.
All right, we're ready to go, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Feel free, for you guys that have not tuned into one of these before, feel free to talk throughout it. If we see something in the chat, we're watching them both as we go. So we're going to have a Q&A section at the end, but we're also going to be addressing your stuff as we talk. So we want this, although we're the ones talking, we're the ones with the microphone, we want this to be kind of an interactive conversation. So please participate.
That's right. Yeah. There will be a few seconds of delay, but we will respond.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that, but it's okay. All right. I'm going to get started.
Okay.
I'm going to count myself down for editing purposes,
Okay.
and then we'll go. So we're going to start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Scott Daly, a not-so-lean, book reading machine, and I'm joined by my demon, Matt Freeman. Matt, how is it going?
It's great, Scott. I'm excited to dive into another one of our books.
And what book would that be, Matt?
This week, we have a book chosen by one of our patron donors at the literally Superman level, Lupin X. And he is right here in chat, indeed. And that book is The Golden Compass by Phillip Pullman, or The Northern Lights if you live in the UK. And this is the first novel in the Pullman's 3-part His Dark Materials trilogy. So, Scott, go ahead and hit us up with that summary.
I sure will, Matt. The Golden Compass tells the story of Lyra Belacqua.
La-
I just watched the movie. I should know this.
You can lean on me for all this because I did the audiobook. So
Well, that feels like cheating. That's not fair.
Lyra Belacqua, Scott.
Belacqua, there we go. An orphan girl living in a world parallel to our own, where people's souls not only live external to their body, but they take the form of adorable talking animals called demons. It's spelled Daemon, but it's pronounced demon.
Yeah.
There's not a chance in hell that throughout this podcast I'm not going to say Damon at some point. It's going to happen because every time I read it to myself, I said Damon. So please don't call me out on that.
Yeah.
It's just going to be something that happens. It's just the way it's going to go. I'm sorry. I know how it's pronounced. I just can't help it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's enough weirdly pronounced names in here that I think a little slack is in order.
That is very true. Anyway, this world is ruled by a theocratic magisterium, which is basically an all-powerful evil church that's definitely not supposed to remind you of the Catholic Church at all. Definitely not.
No.
Lyra's uncle, Azrael, is a scientist researching an elementary particle called dust that he believes holds the key not only to humans' connection to their demon, but also to a doorway to other universes. Shockingly, the church doesn't like this idea at all, and Lyra kind of finds herself in between this battle between Azrael and the church, and she takes this journey north where she meets giant talking bears, witches, and terrible experiments that happen to children. So this is like a kid's book, Matt. It's a kid's book.
Yeah. I don't know if it is a kid's book, is it? It's got some pretty intense stuff in it.
Well, I think that's something that we're definitely going to address, because while it definitely has a protagonist that is a girl, and there are parts of the movie or the book, that definitely seem like it's for kids. You're right. There's other parts that definitely have some more adult themes, some more adult things happening. I mean, this polar bear battle that kind of caps one part of the book off involves a bear like literally ripping the lower jaw off another bear, and its tongue like lolling out.
Yeah,
and like it is a kid's book, but it's not.
It's for older children, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not sure technically what it's targeted at, but yeah.
Yeah, but Pullman's novel. And indeed, the series as a whole became this huge smash hit. It won the Carnegie Medal for Children's Books, which is a British literature award. It won the Guardian's Children's Fictions Prize, which is another British literature award. And it's been on countless international bestsellers. It's adapted into a stage play, a radio drama, a not very good movie a few years ago. And then it's apparently also being made into a BBC TV series that this was announced in 2015. As of last year, it's still happening, but they haven't announced much of it besides that. So this is a very, very popular book, pretty well known. Matt, now we get to you. What did you think of The Golden Compass? Had you read it before first?
I had not read it before at all. I had a vague familiarity with the idea that it's about like a kid who has like a familiar, which is obviously kind of not a terribly accurate or thorough understanding of the content of the book. So I enjoyed reading it a lot. I listened to it actually via audiobook on my commutes, and I was genuinely looking forward to listening to it every day. It was very pleasant. I have some story structure gripes, which we'll get into because I always do about literally everything. But like the actual experience of listening to the whole thing was enjoyable, and like I said, I was always looking forward to it. So that's kind of a litmus test, is like if I'm not really looking forward to getting back to the book, then probably got some pretty bad problems. But this one, I was legitimately into it.
Yeah. Kevin in chat says that Northern Light seems like a better name than Golden Compass, and he's right. They don't actually call it the instrument that is the golden compass in this book is never actually called the Golden Compass, unless you watch the movie, which ironically every time they show it they say the words Golden Compass just to remind you that yes, this is the Golden Compass.
Yeah, you were in the right theater.
Yeah. And he also is making fun of how I pronounce Lyra. It's good. Look, it's gonna happen. I don't know why I read Lyra every time I see that, but it's just what I do.
Yeah, as long as you don't mispronounce Yofa Ragnarsson or
What?
or
Oh yeah, the bear's name? No, that's no. I'm gonna say the bear.
okay.
I don't even think that's right based on the movie, Matt. So the
The
movie pronounced it differently.
the bad bear is Yofa
Oh, that's the
Ragnarsson.
bad bear.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
The
sorry.
good bear, I
Sorry.
literally I know how to pronounce it, but I forget what it actually is until you remind me.
It's like York
Yeah. Yeah,
Burnison.
it's actually just Yorick Burnison, which is pretty easy
That
actually, but
actually is pretty easy when
yeah.
you just say it like that.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So I, for my hand, I had read this book before. I've read the entire his Dark Materials trilogy, but it was a very long time ago. It was not long after the books came out, so I had not ever like approached these books from the critical perspective. I had not ever read these books as a full adult human. So this was kind of an interesting experience for me. I remember very little of them actually, surprisingly. I do not remember. I remember kind of where the plot goes. I remember the basic plot of this one and where it goes in the next two books, but not like specifically what happens in them. So this was, while I read it before, this was kind of like reading for the first time still. And I'm kind of with you. I mean, I think overall I enjoyed it. The thing that surprised me is as we sat down to prepare for this, I had more negative things to say than I thought I would. And that kind of surprised me because as we were writing out notes, I'm like, oh yeah, here's something I didn't like, and here's something I didn't like, and
Yeah.
here's something I didn't like.
I feel like part of that is just because it's easier to criticize than it is to like dig for things, and we did
Yeah.
manage to dig for things too. So it's not going to be a fest of us just dumping on the book. One feature which we've mentioned in passing a couple times now, but I think is worth highlighting is that we've done a few book club books over the course of the Daily Planet. This is the first time that this is the first time we've done like the first book of a trilogy,
Yeah.
and so obviously a lot of threads are left hanging at the end. And I'm gonna confess, this afternoon I kind of like looked up the plot of the rest of the series because I was like a lot of my griping is going to be completely pointless if I'm griping about something that gets resolved in a satisfactory way later, because like it's literally pointless to be like, I didn't like that this wasn't resolved. It's like, yeah, it's a trilogy, like that, not every single thing needs to be resolved in the first book, so that's fine. So anyway, I felt the need to do that though, because I was like, I really need to know the context of some of these things, um even though they're not actually wrapped up within this book. Or at
Yeah.
least
No.
I felt like that anyway.
And I think that's an interesting conversation to have when you're talking about just reading the first book in a series. It's kind of like sometimes reviewing television episode by episode, or even with our Worm podcast, reviewing an arc chapter by chapter, or even arc by arc. That there's clearly stuff that's set up and not resolved. At what point does it become, hey, this is like, there's too much stuff open, there's like no resolution, and at what point does it become, okay, well, this is just the first book in a series, and obviously we're not going to wrap everything up in a nice little neat bow for you. And I think that's something that I think this book definitely skirts with a lot.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, so let's jump into it. So we've got our slides here. We've like we've always do, and I say always. There was one other time.
The other time,
We've gone through and we've picked some quotes from the book that kind of are going to steer our conversation and talk about the things that you and I really wanted to talk about. And the first thing I think you and I want to talk about is Lyra. And do you want to read this one? You want to start us off?
Sure. So yeah, I'll read this bit. I don't think I'm going to use any particular accent here, even though the audio was.
I spoke British last time and was told it was the worst British accent anyone has ever heard. So I'm definitely not going to do that again.
Yeah, I think we'll just stick to the normal voices.
Yeah.
In many ways, Lyra was a barbarian. What she liked best was clambering over the college roofs with Roger, the kitchen boy, who was her particular friend, to spit plum stones on the heads of passing scholars, or to hoot like owls outside a window where a tutorial was going on, or racing through the narrow streets, or stealing apples from the market, or waging war. Just as she was unaware of the hidden currents of politics running below the surface of college affairs, So the scholars, for their part, would have been unable to see the rich, seething stew of alliances and enmities and feuds and treaties, which was a child's life in Oxford.
Yeah, and I think this is a great jumping off point because this is one of the most interesting aspects of the book, but also kind of one of the most frustrating for me, because Lyra is in this place where she is a child and she doesn't understand all these things going on. And I think this kind of establishes that dynamic almost right away. This is at the very beginning of the book. So we have Lyra has everything she's doing and her life, and then there's this whole complicated thing going on. There's this political struggle. There's like infighting between different sections of the government, and like the college is kind of rebelling in their own certain way. And then you have Asriel and you have Mrs. Coulter and you have everyone doing their own thing. And Lyra, for the most part, is just like, I want to get my friend back. And that's like, I want to get my friend back, and I'm going to bring this device to my uncle. And that's really her driving force through all of this. And I think that works in a way that it helps kids follow along, and you kind of slowly dole information out to little kids. But it also, like, there's so many times throughout this book that like something's happening and like I want to see what it is, but Lyra either doesn't care or doesn't understand. And I think we've pointed another one out we'll get to in a bit, but like it's just like, no, talk about this more, like finish your sentence, like say something. And it's frustrating at times.
Yeah, on the chat, Kevin says Pullman is great at telling us about a deep and intriguing setting that he never really manages to show us nearly as well.
That's very well said.
I think that's especially true in this context because like Lyra is not a very good like narrator protagonist. In fact, the whole story, I think it's worth saying, has this very like at arm's length narration style where, you know, a lot of the books we read, the narration style is more like the close third person where you're in the person's head. And this paragraph we just read is fairly typical of the narration in this story where it's like a long paragraph about Lyra, like in the abstract, as if from some third party. So I kept thinking throughout this story that this was going to be the story of Lyra growing up. And I think my understanding from kind of the brief synopsis is that indeed this trilogy is about Lyra growing up. But yes. I think in this book, she doesn't do much growing up at all. And that makes for a few frustrating protagonist moments where she's acting childish in a way that isn't at all endearing, and in fact just makes you frustrated with her as your POV.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and there's this like she is an active protagonist. I'm not going to take away. She does a lot of things in this book, but there are also a lot of things that just happen to her that are outside her control, outside her understanding, and outside her even concern. And that does make kind of sometimes a very passive feeling. I'm trying to talk without laughing at what Lupin just said.
Yeah.
Lupin just said, "Why Buttle? Yeah. You're being unfair to Lyra, I guess."
That's fantastic.
But the other part of that is I like Lyra a lot. I think like this does a good job of characterizing her. She is this like I think barbarian is a great choice. She's can be brutal. She can if she thinks something's wrong, she gets very angry about it, and she's willing to fight, and she's willing to protect those people that she loves. And but then she shifts between that and just being kind of a stupid little kid sometimes.
Yeah, right. Like it's interesting to think about the choices that went into this character because she's definitely like a passionate character. And that's both like her asset and almost her character flaw because she rushes into a lot of situations and she repeatedly like needs to be saved because she has just thrown herself into something generally for the right reasons, but then she needs to be saved from it by the grown-ups really. So that's she is an active protagonist, but she's not necessarily a highly competent protagonist except in a few situations where she manages to lie her way out of things.
To Lyra her way out of things?
Yes, that's I'm sure that was intentional.
Yeah, all right. So let's move on to the next slide. This is where we introduce our golden compass, Matt.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that? I just want to hear you try it.
Alethiometer.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I see. Like I literally watched the movie today to make sure that I got this right, and I still am afraid I'm going to pronounce some of the stuff wrong, but I can handle this one if you want.
Sure.
So this is our introduction to the alethiometer. He crossed the desk and took from the drawer a small package, wrapped in black velvet. When he unfolded the cloth, Lyra saw something like a large watch or a small clock, a thick disc of gold and crystal. It might have been a compass, title, or something of that sort. "What is it?" she said. "It's an alethiometer. It's only one of 6 that were ever made. Lyra, I urge you, again, keep it private. It would be better if Miss Coulter didn't know about it. Your uncle... What does it do?" "It tells you the truth." And then, of course, like, here's one of the frustrating parts, because I included a paragraph that's from chapter and a half later, because that's the only description we get of the alethiometer, and then we move on. And we don't really have her look at it in detail until she's at Miss Coulter's. It's the end of the night, and she's laying in bed and then pulls it out. And here's where we get the description of it. "It lay heavily in her hands, the crystal face gleaming, the golden body exquisitely machined. It was very like a clock or a compass." We get that reminded again, for there were hands pointing to places around the dial. But instead of hours or the points of a compass, there were several little pictures, each of them painted with extraordinary precision, as if on ivory with the finest and slenderest sable brush. She turned the dial around to look at them all. There was an anchor, an hourglass, surmounted by a skull, a chameleon, a bull, a beehive, 36 altogether, and she couldn't even guess what they meant. So this is our titular golden compass. I mean, this is what the book is named for, and I think this goes into that comment at the beginning that Northern Lights was a much better name for it, because while this is definitely the MacGuffin of our story, it's not actually that important, at least to this first book.
Yeah.
So what did you think of this plot device? Because that's basically what it is. It's a plot device.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't live up to its promise within this book, and that's, again, that's one of those things where I don't mean that to sound like a harsh criticism, because it's just like, yeah, I'm sure it comes into play in more important ways later, but it's almost frustrating the degree to which, like, at first she doesn't really know how to use it, and so you have that sense of like, okay, well, this is the kind of story where she's going to be in situations where if only she knew how to use it, then things would be better, but she doesn't, so that prompts her to learn how to use it. But then when she does learn how to use it, they use it like a relatively small number of times, and there's no cost to using it. Like, there's no apparent like, oh well, it wears her out or something. It seems like I kept thinking like, man, why aren't they using this to plot out their whole like tactic of finding exactly what they should do and where they should go, and where everyone is that's relevant, and what the best strategy would be, and like throughout the whole book, she's always asking everybody about what dust is. She's so curious what dust is. Why don't you ask the truth machine what dust is, Lyra?
Yeah, I think you're being a little too hard on the kids' book,
Perhaps.
but I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think this device damages the plot in a way that I think the Time Turner in Harry Potter does, in that if you think of, like, if you think for a while on it, this could do everything for her. This could solve basically every problem she has, and it really only serves to solve specific problems when the plot calls for those problems.
Yeah.
But there's like, and I think one of the other things I really liked about this section is that, again, I'm confused, and I'm trying not to be too negative here, because I do enjoy this book, but I'm confused as to like the narrator versus Lyra perspective sometimes, because there's a whole point in the book, later in the book, where the alethiometer points to something that Lyra doesn't know what it is, and she describes it as like a big creature that she doesn't know what it is, and it turns out it's just a chameleon. And in this description here, it points out that one of the 36 things is a chameleon. So is this just from the narrator's perspective that Lyra doesn't know that's a chameleon? She just doesn't notice it? Like, whose perspective are we seeing when we read this kind of stuff, Yeah. And I think that just like that kind of stuff confuses me.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is skipping ahead or not, but like that reminds me, there's certain bits where like it's describing her like wars with the other children in Oxford, and I kept like throughout those parts I was like, I really need some clarity on whether or not these groups of kids are actually trying to harm each other. Like is this like low grade ethnic warfare, or is this just like kids throwing lumps of mud at each other and laughing and
Yeah, I mean,
and gaily going back to their homes to be washed off and tell their mother what fun they had that day throwing mud. I mean, like it because it was always in this tone of like it was an epic war, and like, okay, are you being sarcastic there, or is it actually an epic war? I can't really track.
but yeah, and I think if it was very clear that we are in Lyra's point of view, like even if it is third person, it's close third person. If it was clear that it was her point of view, it kind of makes sense that she's treating this as very seriously and very real war because she's a kid.
Right.
But you're right, because we kind of jump back and forth between those two things. It's not clear. I mean, my interpretation is certainly that in Lyra's head, this was all out war. In real life, this is just kids playing. I mean, she did steal a boat though. There's a recurring beat where she stole a boat from the Egyptians and is like really terrified about them being mad about it.
Yeah.
She just stole their barge and like sailed it down the river a little ways. But I never, my interpretation was never more than just, rough kids trying to entertain themselves in any way they could.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. But like while I was reading it, I was in this constant state of confusion because, and then like you would think that, and then it would suddenly be like, oh, and then they have like just a brawl with their familiars, like turning into vicious animal forms. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty violent. I don't know.
Yeah, and Sergey, I think that's how you pronounce it, points out, well, maybe if the omniscient device had sentience and an agenda, which it does, kind of like that's not something that's established in this book
Okay, but
for certain, but it does, and that's see that's one thing that like I think if you look hard enough, it's kind of there, like this idea that like because she never like we're told that the alethiometer has books that you need to study for years and years, and like Lyra just picking it up and doing this is almost magical, and
yeah,
and there is that like we are kind of shocked by how fast she learns to read this thing, and everyone else kind of around her is, and they start going down this prophecy thing. But I think to Kevin's point, who says that would actually be fine if you included a scene where it refused to give an answer or was vague or misleading or something. There's all this indication in the book that the reason she can read it is because she's this person of destiny and is not the device itself having its own purpose or its own drive. Or I mean, we find out it's related to dust later, but we don't know yet what dust is and how much dust is controlling all this stuff. And I think again this is the problem of reviewing one book in a 3-book series, and I don't want to fault it for it, but also it's called the Golden Compass.
yeah, right. And I don't know if I find that to be like a sufficient excuse either. Like, okay, so still, even if it had its own agenda, that doesn't stop you from trying to use it as you should, as a truth-telling machine to use on your mission.
Yeah,
You
well, I
don't
mean,
even try to really.
there's a part in the book where I think her demon Pan literally says, "Hey, why don't you ask the alethiometer about what Azrael wants to do or something?" And she says, "No, I don't. I don't think I can know right now." And that's like, it seems like Pullman writing a point in the book. She's like, "Okay, this is why we didn't do it." It's like I'm afraid of the truth. I don't want to know. Bobby does bring up a good point that later in the book, it does seem to be annoyed with her for asking the same question too many times.
Yeah.
There is a point specifically where she's trying to find out what's going on with the bear fight that's coming up, and she keeps and it keeps just saying like, "Hey, just trust him. Like, you're not listening to me." It gets annoyed with her. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you guys are absolutely right that there are hints of that there, but I don't know if they hit that beat hard enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on because we talked about that for a while. And we have a lot of slides here, guys. We're already we were kind of worried we wouldn't have a lot to talk about here, and here we go. We're half an hour in already.
Not going to be a problem.
No. So you want to read this one?
Yeah. So this is this is regarding Mrs. Coulter. So it goes like this. Then a bath with thick scented foam. Mrs. Coulter came into the bathroom to wash Lyra's hair, and she didn't rub and scrape the way Mrs. Lonsdale did either. Sorry, like Mrs. Lonsdale either. She was gentle. Panalyman watched with powerful curiosity until Mrs. Coulter looked at him, and he knew what she meant and turned away, averting his eyes modestly from these feminine mysteries as the golden monkey was doing. He had never had to look away from Lyra before.
So I put this in there and I didn't tell you why.
Okay.
And then you wrote a note here that was very different from where I was going with it. So we'll talk about yours first, and then we can talk about mine.
Yeah, I guess you put this quote in here, and I was just kind of thinking about Mrs. Coulter, and kind of goes back to what we were saying about Lyra's character and her kind of obliviousness sometimes, but like it completely goes over her head that Mrs. Coulter, who turns out to be her actual mother, although she doesn't know it here, actually cares for her and loves her in her own way, despite being a twisted person.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing for Lyra to realize that Coulter is evil, which she does, but there's an absence of what should have been an inner conflict as Lyra realizes that her mother does love her, but is a bad person simultaneously. And there's a tragic absence of what I would have considered like appropriate beats regarding Lyra's feelings for her absentee parents, both of them really, because we're going to get to this, but later she realizes that Azrael is her father and not her uncle, and she just has shockingly little, to say about all that. I thought that was because that's one of those things you're trained by fiction to expect. Okay, if we're getting this trope, we're going to have a reckoning, and I guess there was I guess it's not that there's none. It's just that it's not satisfying to me.
Yeah, well, the weirdest part to me is that the conclusion of this story happens like Azrael and Coulter meet up and have this whole dramatic conversation, which Lyra is just watching. And part of me thinks, how much more dramatically fulfilling would that been if Lyra's there too? And like they're arguing with each other while they're trying to explain stuff to their daughter, who has like gotten smart enough now to like know that they're both kind of being horrible humans, and like everything they're saying and the excuses that they're making are bullshit. Like that's there. She hears this stuff and she thinks that, but because she's off like to the side, she doesn't interact with them in any kind of way. And I was just like, that felt like a missed opportunity to me. It would have been a way to cap this running story about her parents and this realization that these people are her parents and what she does with that information.
Yeah.
And again, like I know what happens to them at the end of this trilogy, and there is a cap on their relationship and their relationship with her and their relationship with each other, but it's just kind of left very dangling. Like the climax of this book like feels like just setup. It doesn't feel like a climax to a story. It feels like just a big setup to here's where the story is going to go next.
Yeah, I guess it probably is fair to critique on that level, because when I think of any of the big like first books of a series that pop into my head, really kind of just off the top of my head, they all have their own internal arcs that resolve at the end. And yes, there are arcs that continue beyond them, but it's really pretty unsatisfying when it's obvious that like the end of a given book in a series is just completely arbitrary.
Yeah. But the reason I pulled this one out, Matt, is the portion at the end there where Pan has to turn his eyes away from the bathing Lyra. Which is something he had never had to do before, and suddenly there's feminine modesty in this, and I think like there's a lot of like children going into adults and the changing nature and the losing of your childhood, and the church kind of being this all powerful presence that like is preventing you from experiencing sin. And I thought this was a little subtle beat of trying to start to set that stuff up, because Lyra has moved away from this childhood world where she was playing with everyone and throwing dirt at each other, and she's moved into this new world, and suddenly this new world has new rules. And like if you think about it, like why, like this creature is part of her. It is her soul.
Right.
Why does there need to be modesty in that situation? Like it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It seems like forced, like church, we have to be modest because the church says so, because the church has deemed that inappropriate. But why?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably Pullman making a statement about the arbitrariness of a lot of these taboos.
Right, and I'm not critiquing the novel here. I think this is actually really well done. I liked this a lot. It's a very subtle way of doing this, and getting you to kind of question these kind of things, and like because the relationship between Mrs. Coulter and her demon is very different from Lyra and Pan, and of course she's an adult and that changes things too. But I think we see that comparison very specifically, and we're setting up some stuff to come. So I liked that.
Yeah, no, I thought this was. I actually noticed. I kind of glad you pulled it out because I noticed this at that moment. I found it interesting in that moment that like, oh, okay, it's an animal. I mean, it's like a sentient animal thing, but I don't understand why. But I get, it's telling you a little bit about Coulter's character too, because she has this sense of what's proper.
Yeah,
and I think I think like I read one interpretation, which I think is probably pretty sound, which doesn't necessarily come across completely in this book by itself, but definitely is supported by the stuff in this book, that Coulter represents the church and Azrael represents Satan, essentially. But Satan from the Milton mythology, not necessarily the Bible Satan, because it has more to do with he's the guy who thinks that God has done everything wrong and thinks he can do better, which is pretty much Azrael's mentality.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's an interesting interpretation, and I think that ties into a lot of the overarching themes of this whole series. I don't know how much it fits into this novel specific itself, but I think we'll get into that as we go.
Yeah.
Kevin Drake says that that whole scene makes him wonder what the heck demons are doing when people have sex, which is probably something that Pullman didn't think of. I think they're in my opinion, they're probably just like rolling around and wrestling with each other. Like if you think of them as just souls on the outside, like that very important act, you think their souls would entwine in some way, so you'd think the animals are just playing with each other.
Yeah, that's kind of like when Coulter and Azrael met at the end, their demons are also kind of like all over each other in that way. So
yeah, and that one weirdo does point out that conflicts are resolved via demons fighting a lot, so maybe they would just be doing it too.
Yeah.
But that's kind of weird because they're like
different species.
Yeah. It's like an eagle and a dog.
Yeah. All right. This has been an enjoyable tangent. Let's
but maybe maybe if you're truly with your soulmate, then your demons will have similar body type things.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe so. Let's go through the whole story right now and figure out if that's true.
Let's really not do that.
Okay.
There is an interesting beat. I didn't write this down or anything, but there's an interesting beat where they mention that demons are almost universally opposite sex, but there's a rare case where they are same sex. And my interpretation of that was homosexuality, but I don't know if that's supported by the text at all. That's just I have no idea.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where if the book tells us that those people are shunned, then it probably is a reference to homosexuality.
Yeah.
Because I think the book goes out of its way to take pot shots at religion wherever possible.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's probably why I was there, because you're reading this book and you get a very you're being directed towards this very anti-religion type of thinking. So you see something like that, and it's like kind of automatically dismissed, and you're like, well, maybe that's yeah. And there's no textual support for it, but I mean, it's interesting.
The anti-religion stuff is relatively subtle and abstract until near the end of the book, but it's definitely there.
Yeah.
I'll do the next part, I guess.
Sure.
So this bit goes, where are you going all alone like this? Going to meet my father. And who's he? He's a murderer. He's what? I told you, he's a murderer. It's his profession. He's doing a job tonight. I got his clean clothes here, because he's usually all covered in blood when he's finishing a job. Ah, you're joking. I ain't. The lemur uttered a soft mewling sound and clambered slowly up behind the man's head to peer out at her. She drank her coffee stolidly and ate the last of her sandwich. Good night, she said. I can see my father coming now. He looks a bit angry.
So this is Lyra Silvertongue coming out. We've seen her kind of be very good at telling tall tales to the group of kids that she's been around. But this is really the first time she's at this point in the book. She's run away from Mrs. Coulter. She's on her own. She's at like alone at night, and some creepy guy walks up to her and like tries to spike her coffee, like really creepily tries to say, "Oh, you want a little whiskey in your coffee?" to this like 11-year-old girl, and we see Lyra like handle it. She starts going on this like she that's the interesting thing about Lyra is there's times when she just like everything's going over her head. She has no idea what's going on. She's completely passive. And then there are times like these when she gets herself in a situation and like lies her way out of it in a spectacular fashion. And this is one of those first big ones we see, which of course will be followed up later in the story.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there, but that's exactly right. That she has her moments where you think it's awesome, like this one right here. You're just like, that was great. And then, like you said, later moments where she just not only does it go over her head, but she almost doesn't care that it goes over her head, which is strange because she seems like she should be the kind of person who wants to be on the ball. So, yeah, not much more to add there.
Yeah. So this next one, I don't know if we have to read this whole thing on this next one. This is going further into our conversations about Lyra and those exact moments where she doesn't care. This is one of those things that like super annoyed me as I was reading it, because like this is a moment not long after the last one where she's trying to figure out how the alethiometer works, and Pan is saying that it might be elementary particles, it might be dust, and she goes into this random thought story about this thing that happened at Gabriel College, where she saw a device that seemed to work by light, and there was this big moral behind this device, and she learned something, and then the whole thing says 5 minutes later Lyra had forgotten the moral, but she hadn't forgotten the little whirling veins in rays of dusty light, which of course is very childlike, right? Like, she doesn't care about the lesson, she's not listening to that. All she cares about is the thing looked pretty. But from like a narrative perspective, you're just like, what was this important? Like, if this mattered, why did we take the time to go into it? If it didn't matter, if it's just characterization, isn't there a better way to do that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as characterization, like, and this may be just a personal issue of mine, but if it's characterization, it's a kind of characterization that actually makes me like the character less. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but like, and I get that she's a child, but painting someone as like incurious is one of the quickest ways to make me not interested in them as a character.
Well, but also she's not incurious. That's the weird thing,
Yeah.
is that like when it comes to a lot of things, she's very curious. She's very curious about what dust is. She asks people over and over again. It's just her curiosities are inconsistent.
Yeah, yeah. I think this kind of thing was making me kind of wait for her to have her moment of like growing up. Not growing up necessarily, but like fully taking the mantle of like the self-consciously active protagonist and being like, I need to get on the ball and solve these problems, and I need to be the one who's responsible for this. And I guess that moment, unfortunately, or whatever, happens at the very, very end, because she's basically walks into this other world by herself, and kind of rejects all of the things that she's been told by people up to that point. And we don't really get to see what she does with that development, because that's the end of the book. But I guess that hopefully, I guess that is that moment that I was waiting for.
Yeah, and I think we're going to touch on that when we get to it. But I do think, as much as we've complained about some various things in this book, I think that moment, that beat really does hit, and it works very well for me. I enjoyed the end of this book a lot.
Yeah, me too. All right, the next bit I will read. And this one is about the demons and how they change over time. Why do demons have to settle? Lyra said. I want Penlyman to be able to change forever. So does he. Ah, they always have settled, and they always will. That's part of growing up. There'll come a time when you'll be tired of his changing about, and you'll want a settled kind of form for him. I never will. Oh, you will. You'll want to grow up like all the other girls. Anyway, there's compensations for a settled form. What are they? Knowing what kind of person you are. Take old Belisaria. She's a seagull, and that means I'm a kind of seagull too. I'm not grand and splendid nor beautiful, but I'm a tough old thing and I can survive anywhere and always find a bit of food and company. That's worth knowing, that is. And when your demon settles, you'll know the sort of person you are. But suppose your demon settles in a shape you don't like. Well, then you're discontented, aren't you? There's plenty of folk like to have a lion as a demon, and they end up with a poodle. And until they learn to be satisfied with what they are, they're going to be fretful about it. Waste of feeling, that is.
Yeah, so we haven't. It's ironic because I think the big selling point of this novel and the reason why people like it so much is the idea of the demon. The idea of this companion that's an animal, like it's a thing that kids really like. It's cool. I think it's my favorite thing when I first read the book, besides polar bears with armor, was the idea that you have this cool little animal companion pet. And this is, I think we see Pullman kind of diving into how these things break out thematically. What these look like when you start diving into, well, what does it mean to have a physical representation of your soul in front of you that's representing who you are and what you are. And I like this a lot. I like the idea that as a child you have this morphing creature because you as a child have like limitless potential. You don't know who you are yet. You don't know who you're going to become. As you age, you start to figure that out, and your soul becomes a true representation of what you are. And this idea that I think is this wonderful human idea that's like, well, what if I become something that I don't want to be? And like the idea that, well, no, like your soul, this is your soul, this is who you are, and if you don't like that thing, that says something about you and your general lack of content with your life and who you are. And until you learn to be okay and learn to realize that, no, I'm sorry, I am the poodle, I know I wanted to be the lion, but that this is who I am, you will not be content. And I just like this imagery a lot. I liked this whole conversation a whole lot.
Yeah, me too. I like the whole idea of the demons. I like the metaphor. I like what they symbolize. I like this window into Pullman's conception of what a soul is or could be. And this also touches upon, I think we'll get to it later even more, but this idea of maturation having a lot of the idea of the demons is a stand-in for like sexual maturity, just as much as like maturity, because in this
Yeah.
particular case it's talking about like you you settle into who you are, and the kind of state of flux that it is to be a child um diminishes, but also
Yeah.
there's the element of like you expose yourself to this new realm of possible feeling when you become an adult and no longer a child, and that has to do with the kind of the other reason why the familiar settles.
Yeah, yeah. And expanding out from this, I really like the idea that like throughout the book we're seeing constant representation of your soul like being your truth. Like there are so many moments where someone says something and someone else is surprised by it, but they mask it, but their demon shows its truth. Like
Hmm.
I think when the first time Lyra mentions dust to Mrs. Coulter, like Mrs. Coulter is this perfectly composed woman, but her golden monkey, his hair stands up straight, and he like snaps his neck around and stares. And the idea that like your soul betrays you and who you are just naturally because it is the fundamental representation of you. And I really like that type of imagery, that type of taking that metaphor and making it literal. It's very clever.
Yeah. Speaking of that, like I like the character of Panalaimon, like because they're always kind of nattering at each other. Like you might think that they would just like completely agree on everything all the time, because after
Yeah.
all, it is like a girl and her soul, literally. But because of who Lyra is, she she is the kind of person who always has to poke at everything, and never just obeys anything and never just gets along with anyone sight unseen. So she's of course she and her demon are going to have, they're both going to be opinionated, because that is who she is. She's opinionated and strong-willed, and so they always kind of natter at each other, but they're also,
Yeah.
they also love each other, but they also argue all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One thing we missed, Kevin, in the YouTube chat, says that the book describes Lyra as a person with no imagination and how that's a perfect trait for liars and people with ambition. And then he also mentions that that seems like nonsense, as Lyra clearly has a very active imagination, and I agree with that. I missed that part where they said that she doesn't really have an imagination. I mean, I read it, but I don't remember that because yeah, she's a very imaginative. I mean, like, to lie is to imagine a story and make it true through your words. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
I vaguely remember that line and being like, "What? What are you trying to say there?" Because, I mean, it like, and she'll tell people stories that are just complete flights of fancy, and yeah, she's I don't know what that what is what does he think imagination means?
Right. Yeah. Like and I see like the argument here that like if you have too big of an imagination, like you won't be able to pick a lie because you have like an infinite choice of lies. But I don't know about like I think that's different. I think that's not the same thing.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. He's probably trying to say something specific, and it just didn't come across
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah. Good catch, Kevin. Yeah. All right. So we got this next one. You want me to read this one?
Sure.
So this is the first conversation between the representative of the witches and Father Coram, and we talk about the destiny and the prophecy of Lyra because this is a fantasy book, so naturally there has to be some sort of prophecy. So the witches have talked about this child for centuries past, said the consul, because they live so close to the place where the veil between the worlds is thin. They hear immortal whispers from time to time, in voices of those beings who pass between the worlds. And they have spoken of a child such as this who has a great destiny that can only be fulfilled elsewhere, not in this world, but far beyond. Without this child we shall all die, so the witches say, but she must fulfill this destiny in ignorance of what she is doing, because only in her ignorance can we be saved. Do you understand that, Father Coram? No, said Father Coram, unable to say that I do. What that means is that she must be free to make mistakes. We must hope that she does not, but we can't guide her. And so, I don't have a problem with prophecies and destinies and that kind of thing. I don't have a problem with that archetype and that story device in general. I sometimes don't like how it's used, and the way it seems to be used here, this idea that we can't tell her she has a destiny because then it'll be ruined, but she has it, just seems like this like constructed plot device to specifically lampshade us. Like
Yeah.
it's like you can't know this stuff because if Lyra knows it, then it'll be ruined. It's like Pullman came up with the story device in order to come up with an excuse to hide things from us, the reader. And it's just like it just feels a little lazy to me.
I'm just not sure what it adds. I'm
Yeah.
like this book is, in my opinion, strictly better if it just doesn't even have the Child of Destiny thing. Like there's no Destiny and prophecy stories are usually interesting when it's like an Oedipus thing where the fact that the prophecy happened is in some ironic and dramatic way what causes the prophecy to be executed, or you know some kind of precog thing where you're actually kind of interacting with the future data in an interesting narrative way. But this is literally, like you said, it's just like, hey readers, the protagonist of this story is going to be really important.
Yeah, but we can't tell you why
Yeah,
because it'll ruin it.
yeah, right. And also I hadn't really thought this through too well, so we're going to move on from this idea about prophecy
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a later conversation all about destiny and prophecy and what those things mean, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Like obviously, Lyra gets to the point where she leaves the world, so she's fulfilling the prophecy unbeknownst to her so far. But that's all
Yeah.
we really know.
Yeah.
But let's move on. Let's meet our Panzerbjorn.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
I think I did.
It's the Panzerbjorns.
You want to read this one?
Sure. Yorick Bernison, said Father Coram again. May I speak to you? Lyra's heart was thumping hard because something in the bear's presence made her feel close to coldness, danger, brutal power, but a power controlled by intelligence. and not a human intelligence, nothing like a human, because of course bears had no demons. This strange hulking presence gnawing its meat was nothing like she had ever imagined, and she felt a profound admiration and pity for the lonely creature. He dropped the reindeer leg in the dirt and slumped on all fours to the gate. Then he reared up massively, 10 feet or more high, as if to show how mighty he was, to remind them how useless the gate would be as a barrier.
So Yorick Bernenson is my favorite character in this book,
Yeah,
and I think it's very clear. Like I like, and I think a lot of people say that. I think a lot of people like the idea of the armored bears. I think a lot of people like Yorick, and the reason is Yorick Bernenson is one of the only characters in this book that has a complete arc. He starts at a place and he ends at a place, and he has changed over time, and he starts at a low point and he ends at a high point, and it's through help with the protagonist that he goes through this struggle, and he has this great battle and he wins. Like, if you look at the book from his perspective, he has a complete story.
yeah.
And that kind of makes sense because he leaves the book after this. Like, the next book, I don't know if he ever comes back. I think he might kind of come back a little bit in the end. I honestly don't remember. But he's great. He's a great, interesting character, and he changes and he grows and he experiences things and he learns and he ends a king.
Yeah, yeah, he's this great character who he has his code, and like he has his kind of like moral core of his character where he starts out the story kind of like you said, where he's at his low point, and he gets like a second chance, and he makes this decision that he's basically gonna devote himself to Lyra, and um, it, he's just someone you're rooting for the whole time, and you like him and you want him to succeed, which is like you said, he's one of the more likable characters. So you're happy when he finally does.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk about here, and I think what another thing we were talking about before, was this difference between human intelligence and bear intelligence, and how the Panzerbjorn here have this really unique, like, they're different from everyone else. They're
Yeah,
different from humans. They're different from witches. They're unique,
yeah,
different, and it's really cool. I like it a lot. Like the idea that they're intelligent in this wholly unique kind of way.
yeah, yeah. I love kind of like alien intelligence as fiction, and that's one thing that struck me about this is it's not like Pullman just kind of shoehorned like, oh, they're kind of like the Mongols but they're bears. This basically really seems like if you took bears and made them a lot smarter, but not necessarily like humans, that this is the sort of organization that they would form and the sort of culture that they would have, and I appreciated that and enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think Rachel gives a really great comment here in the chat that that mentalities are so different in a world that has demons in it. That because at a glance you can make assumptions about someone's character by looking at their demon. We talked about how you can see their true emotion, but just what shape it is tells you something about that. So having a being who is intelligent, but you cannot judge them in that first glance way is kind of terrifying in this world where you're so used to doing it. And that's absolutely correct. Really great catch. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because they definitely repeatedly hit that where every time she encounters like any kind of intelligent being that doesn't have its demon, or a demon far away from its human, in one case, she's just like really unnerved by it, and yeah, it makes sense that you would really get used to all of the benefits of having a person and their demon present in terms of being able to read into things.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Great. Well, let's move on.
Okay.
So now we get to the idea of pulling.
Yeah.
You want to read this one?
Sure. She knew it. She knew what he was doing. Demons could move no more than a few yards from their humans, and if she stood by the fence and he remained a bird, he wouldn't get near the bear. So he was going to pull. She felt angry and miserable. His badger claws dug into the earth, and he walked forward. It was such a strange, tormenting feeling when your demon was pulling at the link between you, part physical pain deep in the chest, part intense sadness and love. And she knew it was the same for him. Everyone tested it when they were growing up, seeing how far they could pull apart, coming back with intense release.
So I think this is the idea that, like, there's geographical limits for how far apart they can be, as representative of this emotional strain of literally having your soul ripped out of you, is really cool. I think that's a fun idea, and I like this because we're intentionally setting up the whole cutting that's going to happen in the
Right.
future. Like we're setting up how emotionally and physically devastating just being away from them is, let alone cutting the link between you, but just stretching that link is so intensely painful. So we're taking the time to set up, like, Pullman wants us, the audience, to understand like how cruel and awful it would be to separate someone's soul from them in this way.
Yeah, so I find the severing related parts of the story to be by far the most like affecting and successful dramatically. And it's exactly because of moments like this actually where it's set up that yeah, this is the reality of what that means is you're ripping away the most important thing that a person can have as defined in the terms of the story.
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is a really good moment. I like the relationship between Lyra and Pan is great. We've touched on it already, but we see these moments, they like run back to each other and they're crying and they're hugging and they love each other so much. And it's this real, like, it's your soul, like it's this real, like, unbreakable bond, and it's great. It's really great.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. I think this basically segues into the next one too.
Yeah, because now Lyra is at the General Oblation Board hideout, Bolvanger as it's called, I think.
Yeah.
And she was just about to get sliced because she got caught because she was running through vents, but Mrs. Coulter saved her just in time, because although she fully supports this thing, doing it to her daughter is apparently beyond the pale.
Yeah, right.
So it's this great moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'll just keep reading this one.
Sure.
Lyra, Lyra, Lyra. Darling, these are big, difficult ideas, dust and so on. It's not something for children to worry about. But the doctors do it for the children's own good, my love. Dust is something bad, something wrong, something evil and wicked. Grown-ups and their demons are infected with dust so deeply that it's too late for them. They can't be helped. But a quick operation on children means they're safe from it. Dust won't stick to them ever again. They're safe and happy, and you don't have to do that to us, she said. You could just leave us. I bet Lord Asriel wouldn't let anyone do that if he knew what was going on. If he's got dust, and you've got dust, and the Master of Jordan and every other grown-up's got dust, it must be all right. Darling, she said, some of what's good as to hurt us a little.
Yeah. So that's obviously Miss Coulter's kind of despicable here, but it's very, it's this whole thing's very interesting. This idea, like, this is, I think, when the book starts to pivot more into that very anti-religion bent that it takes in the third arc, where that the church has declared dust evil, and therefore we must do whatever we can to stop it, even though obviously this is just a natural part of growing up. Like, there is a lot of direct kind of comparisons to castration here. I think castration is specifically called out in the book at least a couple times.
Yeah.
And they're like, this is beyond cruel, beyond terrible, and yet here we have it. Here's a person trying to justify it, even though while she's trying to justify it, she just freaked out and like pulled her daughter out of it the second she saw her in it, because while it's terrible, or while it's completely necessary and good and better for the world, she doesn't want her daughter to have to go through it, because she knows what it actually is.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and I think that's one of the ways in which this book is most effective, is in kind of speaking to older children about this type of occurrence, which they doubtless experience, where adults will lie to children in a way that the adult is kind of trying to protect them from some harsh reality, where the adult's behavior will clearly indicate one thing, and then their speech will contradict it, just like this. And also, you're sort of, for children who may not be kind of savvy to the ways of the world, you're kind of teaching them through the story. You're showing them like that this pattern exists, and like as adults and experienced media consumers, we're programmed to automatically doubt all of these assertions made by the adult characters to the child protagonist, because we recognize the trope. But
Yeah.
children reading the story don't, and so the reveal that this is all terrible, probably lands better for them and more effectively.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. So there is something to, and that one weirdo points out that severing has a mortality rate, so of course she's not going to want her daughter to go through it. I wonder I wonder, like, speaking of Miss Coulter, if they had gotten the mortality rate of this process down to 0, that no one died anymore, I wonder if she still would have put her daughter through the process. Because there's some hints, and it's coming from Azrael, so you don't know how much truth there is to it, but there's some hints that at least he thinks that everything that Coulter is doing is literally just about her finding a path to power, and she doesn't necessarily believe the things that she's saying or the things that she's doing. It's just a means of an end to her. She saw an opportunity and grabbed for it. And I don't know how much truth there is to that, at least in this book specifically, but it seems that this would at least sort of kind of indicate that.
Yeah, if you view her as a metaphor for the church, I think that's probably what Pullman's trying to say. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
That like the church, like, may or may not believe any given thing, but what's really important to the church as an organization is holding on to power and grasping for it. And yeah. I think that works pretty well as a comparison.
And I think castration was definitely something that members of the church did to certain members of their congregation, but some people were escaped from it because they had sway or power or influence within the church itself. So I think that tracks as well, that this idea that this is for your own good, but not for my own good because I'm a priest and I'm important.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about witches. So This is a quote all about witches. And I am very confused about witches. I'm very confused about how witches fit into the story, why they are here. And this quote kind of illustrates one of the things that I don't understand about them. So you want me to read this one?
Sure.
Witches own nothing. So we're not interested in preserving value or making profits. And as for the choice between one thing or another, when you live for many hundreds of years, you know every opportunity will come again. We have different needs. You have to repair your balloon and keep it in good condition, and that takes time and trouble. I see that. But for us to fly, all we have to do is tear off a branch of cloud pine. Any will do, and there are plenty more. We don't feel cold, so we have no need for warm clothes. We have no means of exchange apart from mutual aid. If a witch needs something, another witch will give it to her. If there's a war to be fought, we don't consider cost as one of the factors in deciding whether or not it's right to fight. Nor do we have any notion of honor as bears do, for instance. An insult to a bear is a deadly thing. To us, inconceivable. How could you insult a wish? What would it matter if you did? So there's this whole thing about how witches exist almost in like on a separate plane, how they need nothing that we need. They have no bother nor troubles. Like petty squabbling doesn't matter to them. There's all this information about that. And then we learn that witches have been in like wars with each other for ever. Some are working for Coulter and Azrael, so they're obviously getting something out of that. There's like they confuse me. Like what are they? I don't really understand.
Yeah. They like it's interesting because I was thinking about this after you pulled this out, and I was like, the witches seem like another alien culture, but they're actually even harder for me to get a handle on than the bears, because like bears but smarter makes some degree of sense, but the witches are almost like, despite appearing human, the fact that they like they don't seem to require food or shelter or any material thing at all, really. They're more inhuman because they're hardly even corporeal, and they're practically immortal too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I agree. I'm wondering if it's like supposed to be just intentionally mysterious, or if it means some particular thing. I mean, there's the sense in which he's calling them witches, but they're like good guys, and that's yet another like attack on religion. But I don't know what they mean exactly. Yeah,
because I mean the witches we do see, like there are bad witches that attack our heroes, but we don't actually see those ever. They're just like arrows shooting out of the clouds, and they're far in the distance. So the only witches we talk and interact with are the ones that are on our good side. So I agree that if you look, like he specifically used the name witch because of its negative church connotation and twisting it to make them the good guys, that makes sense. And there, of course, there's always the chance that Serafina Pekkala is just lying here. And that one weirdo does point out something that later in the book, when Lyra is asking her about the cold, she says that they do feel cold. It's just that if they wrapped themselves up, they would lose their connection with the universe and the stars and dust, I guess. So they choose to ignore the cold. And that's different. That's not how she described it. So, I mean, there is obviously the thing here that Serafina Pekkala is just kind of full of shit, and she's making herself seem better than her and her people really are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that as a big lie, because they may feel the cold, but if you can't be harmed by it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah,
and I think that they're wearing like streaming black scraps of cloth while flying around in like literally sub-zero air. So
yeah,
so it doesn't harm them, and so that's what I mean is like what's hard to relate to is their complete disconnection from anything material. Regardless of whether they can sense it, it doesn't impinge any needs on them.
And this is one of my complaints about the story as a whole, is that there's these disparate elements everywhere that don't seem to mesh with each other very well. Like, I understand, like, the Panzerbjorn are really cool. How do they tie into what the story's trying to do? The witches, how do they tie into what the story's trying to say? Like, these things feel like Pullman had these really cool ideas, like bears that wear armor. That's a really cool idea. I'm going to throw it in this book. Witches that fly, like, around, and they have, like, what if someone had a demon that could go really far away? Wouldn't that be advantageous? But what does that have to do with the things that you're trying to say? And the witches themselves seem like exposition devices. They come in to explain things to us and to other characters when we don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's very possible, like I said, it's been so long since I read the other two books, it's very possible that their role becomes way more clear, but I don't think that fixes this book itself.
Yeah. I don't think you can really successfully disentangle the metaphorical or thematic meaning of the witches just from this book. It may become clear later. That's one thing I was noticing when I was looking over the future book synopses was, like, in terms of this book, the witches are kind of a weird out there idea. But in terms of what apparently happens in later books, they're not even close to the weirdest and most out there thing that ends up happening.
No, so, definitely not.
So I have a feeling, he's kind of populating his universe with this zoo of different takes on, like, what it means to have a soul, and what is the nature of evil, and what's the nature of, like, becoming an adult. What is it to become an adult? What is it to be a human? And I mean, and you can maybe say, like, well, okay, the witches don't really know what it is to be human, maybe, because they don't have so many of the things that make us human, which is, like, our mortality and our attachments. That's the best I can do, really.
Connor brings up a good point here, that the witches exist outside the system, which allows them an analysis of society's obsession with material possessions and wealth. I can't talk. I think they're representative of that ideal, but Pullman shows it's not that simple, in that many of the witches don't live up to the ideal that's eschewed here. And I think that's true, that maybe, like, Serafina Pekkala is representing witches at their best, but they clearly don't always live up to this. Like, you could never insult us. Maybe that's how she wants to see their tribe. Like, you could never insult us. We don't care about any of these things. We exist outside of all your stuff. But that's clearly not entirely true.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one thing that we're sorely lacking is, like, understanding why the witches would follow Azrael versus Lyra. Like, what arguments is he putting to the other witches that makes them convinced that that's a good idea for them? So,
and we never get to see that.
Yeah, and that would clarify a lot of, like, what is their motivation? Like, why do anything, really, if you're this, like, practically immortal being with no needs?
Yeah. So we're rounding near the end here, and of course, we didn't pull out any of the Lyra tricking the Bear King quotes. I thought about pulling out something there, but I didn't see anything that I really liked. I think that's one of the best scenes in the book for me, just because we've already talked about Yorick and how we get to see a real end to his arc and how much that like that. So we didn't pull out any quotes there, but I did like that part. But here we finally get some information on what dust is from Azrael, Lyra's father. If you wanna read this one.
Sure. Dust really existed. That left them the problem of deciding what it was. And given the church's nature, there was only one thing they could have chosen. The magisterium decided that dust was the physical evidence for original sin. But, Lyra struggled to find the words she wanted. But it ain't true, is it? Not true like chemistry or engineering. Not that kind of true. There wasn't really an Adam and Eve. Think of Adam and Eve like an imaginary number, like the square root of -1. You can never see any concrete proof that it exists, but if you include it in your equations, you can calculate all manner of things that couldn't be imagined without it. Incidentally, the Bible gave us the name dust as well. At first, they were calling it Rusakov particles, but soon someone pointed out a curious verse toward the end of the 3rd chapter of Genesis, where God's cursing Adam for eating the fruit. He opened the Bible again and pointed it out to Lyra. She read, "In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, and dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return."
So, I know you have a bone to pick with the imaginary number reference here.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's funny because I'm like, is this a bone to pick with Azrael or is this a bone to pick with Pullman? Because Pullman could very well be putting this into Azrael's mouth as just the kind of like clever sophistry that a smart person comes up with when they're trying to justify some particular religious argument. Yeah. But like any scientist would understand that the square root of -1i is a defined quantity. It's an abstract idea that was basically defined that way to serve a functional need, and maybe in their universe the idea of original sin actually explains things better than the null hypothesis, which would be no, there's no original sin, it's not a real thing. But I don't really see any evidence in the book for that being the case. So either Azrael is just kind of blowing hot air, which is kind of unlike him actually, or I just take issue with Pullman's comparison.
Well, it's kind of ridiculous here. I mean, I don't think he's necessarily blowing hot air, but he's talking to an 11-year-old girl who has never had serious schooling. Like the odds of her fully comprehending what an imaginary number even is are very low. She says she gets like random little bits of information from the professors and the masters that she is following around, or the lessons they try to impart on her. But he's talking pretty complex math theories here that there's no way she would understand. So this is him really posturing, in my opinion. He's trying to sound as intelligent as possible, when he doesn't even need to, because it's a little girl. Like I don't think you need to explain in the level of detail he's doing here.
Yeah, I mean, because you could have just as well said, like a number, like 1. You'll never actually see 1, but it's useful to have the concept of a 1. That's just as true as using the concept of square root of -1, honestly, and it conveys the same information, but it actually shows the fallaciousness of the argument even more clearly. So but I think it's interesting that, like, even though Azrael is like a heretic, and he's going against the church, he still seems to buy into the orthodoxy, and I'm pretty sure you find out in the latter books that like his mission is to kill God, which means he thinks that God is a thing, and so he's not an atheist. He's just a heretic.
No, and I think this is where, like, a lot of people talk about getting into the religious aspect of this book. There was a lot of very mad Christians that felt like this series of books was indoctrinating their children into an atheistic kind of worldview, where it's clearly pointing out that religion is bad, the church is bad, faith or spirituality on its own are bad. And I think that's kind of where I start to push back. But there is something to be said of, like, even the scientists in this world, even the man of science that's going against the church, still accepts the existence of a God, and his response to it is, I want to kill it.
Yeah.
So and I think Pullman gets more and more into this really anti-religion bent as we go through the books. But this is the start of it first. That yeah, this guy is a scientist. This guy is a researcher, but he still believes in all this stuff, but he wants to kill it. So like, it's pointing that even divorced from the church itself, from organized religion itself, people that still believe in this stuff, per Pullman, are not good people. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, that's true because, on the one hand, Pullman does seem, yeah, it's like there's clearly some aspects of spirituality that he's not rejecting because, like, I think that he would probably say there's something like a soul because why else have this elaborate metaphor with the demons?
Yeah.
See, I said it, and I
there we go.
Yeah. But there's, I think he probably draws a line somewhere between like having a personal sense of spirituality and following like the orthodoxy. But I don't know. That's the thing is you can't, because it's all so metaphorical and abstract, you can't really nail him down on what exactly he means.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's move on.
Okay.
This slide is interesting because this gets me into a weird aspect of this book that I want to explore with you that I don't fully understand. Okay. And I don't think we ever, even throughout the trilogy, really understand this. So this is when Lyra is woken up and told that Azrael has taken her friend.
Okay.
Roger. He's taken Roger? He told me to wake him up and dress him, and I didn't think to argue. I never have. The boy kept asking for you, miss, but Lord Azrael wanted him alone. You know when you first came to the door, miss, and he saw you and couldn't believe his eyes and wanted you gone? Lyra's head was in such a whirl of weariness and fear that she could hardly think, but yes, she said. It was because he needed a child to finish his experiment, miss, and Lord Azrael has a special way to himself of bringing about what he wants. He just has to call for something, and then, of course, he gets interrupted, because whenever someone's about to say something important in this book, they get interrupted. But so this is, and I think there's two different ways of reading this, but there's some kind of really subtextual and here literal textual beats about how Azrael and Coulter seem to have magical powers.
Yeah.
Like there's this idea that, and we see it throughout the book, that Coulter has a way of influencing people and like is super charismatic and super charming to the effect of that it completely like slips past people's defenses and they're just unable to do anything about it. And then Azrael here kind of almost implicitly is told like if he wants something, he has a way to make it come to him, and that's not just him exerting his power like politically or financially. It's like he's in the middle of the fucking tundra and his servants here saying, oh, he wanted a kid, so he found a way to get it to him. So like I don't know, like what is your interpretation of this? Do they have magical powers, and is that maybe how you explain how Lyra was able to read the alethiometer so easily, is because she inherited some sort of magic whoozy-wuddy power? I don't know, and I don't know, there's not enough in here to say like why that is or how that is, or it's just little weird beats.
Yeah, I can't really add anything beyond your kind of sketch of what's going on here, because like you said, Coulter, she's everyone wants to be her friend. She has like a weird metallic machine smell about her, apparently. She's able to like charm the children to get them to go to the oblation board.
Yeah. And even the idea, like one of the things that confused me for so long was like if the master was supposed to be protecting her, if Azrael was specifically taking her there to hide her from Coulter, then why did the master let this happen? And one of the arguments could be that like there's just political pressures and all this stuff going on under the surface that we don't see. But another could just be that he was charmed by Coulter's magic powers.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, this is one of the things that seems like it's gonna be explained later, but I don't know. And even in my reading of the future books, I was like, seems like there's a lot more magic stuff going on and increasingly overtly magical things happening, but I didn't read anything that really explained the origin of those two characters.
Yeah, and see that, like, obviously this is another world. Like, obviously there are things that happen. There are characters that don't feel cold and fly by plucking a stick from a tree.
Right.
There are talking bears. Like, things are different here. But like by the time you're at the end of a book and you have this randomly unexplained new power, like you need to establish rules and then to hold on to your rules.
Yeah.
And there's no established rule that says these two people just have this magical ability to do things. And I just don't know where it comes from.
Yeah, I think you could probably levy a similar criticism at the stuff like the cliff ghasts, where like the conceit of the demons is introduced very early on, and you have a lot of time to get used to it. The conceit of the bears is introduced relatively early on, and you're like, okay, so it's not just the demons. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. And then the witches come along, and you're like, okay, this is a lot actually less like Earth than I even thought before. And then there's stuff like, oh, and then also there's like creepy like monsters that just live in the wilderness that aren't even animals. They're like just the world is just infested like some Final Fantasy world with monsters that are just gonna attack and kill everyone. Like this is nothing like Earth at all, actually.
Yeah.
And so you kind of lose track of what universe you're actually in.
Yeah, and like I love like alternate universe stuff. I like fantasy. I like these new worlds, but like I said, like establish your rules and then stick with them. And if you're going to introduce something new like this, if you're going to introduce a new rule, a new crinkle on the establishment, like you have to explain it. Like you don't have to explain it all. I don't need full exposition for how Azrael got magic powers, but like explain it to me. Like dole it out to me. Like tell me where this came from. Does everyone have this? I don't know. I don't know. Like and that's just it left me kind of frustrated.
Yeah, Mike points out that this is an application of Sanderson's first law of magics, which is that you should never really use like a magic to solve a conflict, or I would even say you should not even be using magic as a plot device, full stop, unless you've like explained what the magic is and how it works. Kevin reminds us that Wells Fargo still exists in this world, so it has to be somewhat like our Earth.
Yeah. I mean, there's Oxford too.
Yeah, but
yeah, Wells Fargo is very, very interestingly pulled out and dropped. Yeah.
But Bobby asks if the night ghasts were even real or just a nightmare, and I'm pretty sure they were real. But we were just talking earlier about how she steals the coins, or she messes around the coins in the heads of the scholars, and then like ghosts come into her room. And I completely read that as a dream.
So did I.
And then, like, apparently ghosts are real in this world. And,
yeah.
So I was...
Well, because you have the ghost daemons, right? The ones that are cut, turn pale, and become ghostly.
Yeah.
But then there's also kind of confirmation that there's, like, ghostly, like, spirits of people who that were cut. That, like, it's not just kids wandering the forest. It's, like... Yeah. There's a lot of different things here that are kind of introduced in a way that you're just not sure, like what is the limit on this? What are the rules? That kind of stuff. And
yeah,
I don't know. I just wish it was kind of like, again, I'm not saying you need to stop and explain something every time you do it, but set expectations and then abide by them.
Yeah, you gotta explain your mythology, or at least you have to make me understand your mythology at some point.
And, maybe this is one of those moments where we have to go stop ourselves and say this book was written for children, and children are a little more accepting when you just throw them into a new world and say, no, this happens because it's this world and it's magic and weird things happen and you can't explain it and all this stuff. And I don't think that necessarily makes it a good narrative decision, but we can't forget that angle on it.
It reminds me of the contrast between Narnia and Lord of the Rings, because apparently Tolkien was driven crazy by the fact that Lewis would just do things like throw Santa Claus into the middle of his story, and he'd be like, you can't just do that. That ruins the sense that this is an actual world to just have Santa Claus show up. And Tolkien was far on the other end of the spectrum, where everything in all of Tolkien's stories was part of the same coherent, like mythos, and it was his coherent creation that had its own absolutely consistent internal logic. And C.S. Lewis
Yeah.
is like, the children aren't going to care. They just want to see Santa Claus in the story. And so I think that's the friction we're seeing here.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison because didn't Pullman kind of write this? Didn't you read me something where Pullman wrote this to kind of be like the anti Chronicles of Narnia, like we're
Yeah.
the same kind of thing, but on the opposite side of the spectrum.
Right. That was a different regard because C.S. Lewis was sort of writing Christian propaganda,
Yeah,
and yes, someone had pointed out that both of these stories basically involve toward the very beginning a child going into a wardrobe and then coming out in a very different world than the one they went into. Except
yeah,
in Lyra's case, it's because she learns things.
yeah, yeah. But still, I think that's a good pull. Yeah. All right, so let's wrap this thing up. Let's go to our final slide here for the night. This is the end of the book. This is what we kind of hinted at the beginning. And this is Lyra's decision. You want to read this one?
Sure. Dust. He's going to find the source of dust and destroy it, isn't he? That's what he said. And the oblation board in the church and Bolvanger and Mrs. Coulter and all, they want to destroy it too, don't they? Yeah, or stop it affecting people. Why? Because if they all think dust is bad, it must be good. She didn't speak. A little hiccup of excitement leapt in her chest. Pennylyman went on. We've heard them all talk about dust, and they're so afraid of it. And you know what? We believe them, even though we could see that what they were doing was wicked and evil and wrong. We thought dust must be bad too, because they were all grown up and they said so. But what if it isn't? What if it's... She said breathlessly, yeah, what if it's really good?
And then Lyra decides to walk into the sky and into another world. And that's where our book ends. So, Matt, as we wrap this thing up, what is the lesson of this story?
It's that everything that grown-ups say is bad is actually good.
I mean, you could argue that, couldn't you? I mean, obviously, it's way more complicated than that, and I think Pullman's trying to do a lot of stuff here, and I think for the most part, a lot of it works. You know, we've spent an hour and a half talking about all the little things that we liked, the fun ideas, but yeah, I think there's definitely something in here that, and Mike says it's think for yourself, and I think you're absolutely right there. I think. Matt, you and I were talking about that before, that think for yourself, be true to yourself is something we see throughout this. It is one of the common denominators that links this stuff. It's the thing with Uric. It's the thing with talking about settling and being confident in who you are and what you are. It's kind of the common thread that weaves through all this whole thing.
Yeah. So basically keep your own counsel. Yeah, that's very, very much true.
Bobby says, what 11-year-old doesn't know about ad hominem? That's great.
Yeah.
And Kevin brings up an interesting point here that she didn't, like, Lyra just has witnessed her best friend die.
Yeah.
And, like, gets over it rather quickly.
Yeah.
And like, it's not like, I understand, like, you go through this emotional thing and you come to this decision, but there's these weird beeps where she like hiccups in excitement at this realization that she just made. And she just like, you're holding the corpse of your best friend in your arms and you're hiccuping in excitement about the idea of going after dust. And that right. Just like, it just felt a little weird to me.
Yeah. I think that was one of the first things we talked about this morning, was my sense that, like, this book is actually incredibly sad because she fails completely. Like, you know, her personal mission in the story is to bring the alethiometer to her dad and to rescue her friend. And turns out her dad is evil and she doesn't give it to him. And her friend dies, and a lot of other people die. And based on my understanding of the future books, pretty much everybody dies. But
these books don't end happy.
Yeah, but this book alone, though, she just failed completely. It's the most tragic, and you're right, it is jarring that she doesn't even. You're sadder than she is.
Yeah, because the book wants to end on that happy note. So even though she failed completely, it hits that beat, and then it says, "Okay, time to move on. We have to end on this encouraging note. We have to end on this." Now the world is open and I'm going to find the source of dust and it's going to be good. And so poor Roger just gets the short shift.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the end of our discussion of this book. You know, like I think we were very critical, and I think our criticism was fair. I don't think we were too harsh on this book. I don't think we were too mean. There are definitely parts of this book I really liked. I liked it much better when I was a kid, and I think if a kid were to read it now, I think they would like it much better. But thinking about why this book was so successful, why was this book so popular? And I think if you break it down to its elements, you can see why. Like the idea of having an animal pet that morphs into different things is exciting and fun. The idea of having a polar bear that wears armor is cool. Like the witches are cool, and this fighting and all these things on the surface level are very cool. So it makes sense why a kid said, "This is awesome. I like reading this."
Yeah, right. I mean, not to belabor the comparison to Narnia, but like kids usually like Narnia much more than they like Lord of the Rings because the dry
for them.
The dry consistency of Lord of the Rings is really not appealing to children. But that's the kind of thing that grown-ups require. Basically, we require consistency.
Yeah. Rachel gets a really good point here that they think this is part of what makes the book feel so special to you as a kid, that it gives you that bad ending. And most kids' books tend to end on, and everything works, and everyone won, and they won the day, but here's a book that says no. Like yes, the book ends on a little bit of a hopeful tinge, but yes, Lyra failed. Things don't always work out the way you wanted to. The thing that you were trying to do all along is actually just feeding into the destruction of the person you were trying to save.
Yeah.
And that I don't know how mature it actually is, but yeah, as a kid, it makes it feel very mature, and that I think is like fits the lane for what Pullman was trying for. The age of the kid that he wants to be reading this book, that is like in this like transition period between childhood and early adulthood, that he hasn't gone through puberty yet. Like they're right on the cusp of that, and they want to feel like they're maturing and going through this tough stuff. So the book slots into that area really well.
Yeah, Sergei makes a point that there are parts of the book that I liked, but not the book as a whole, and that's kind of how I felt. Like I said at the very beginning of this, it feels weird to say, but I genuinely enjoyed listening to the book for its entirety.
Yeah, and it's funny. 2 books in a row now, we've done this thing where reading these books, I loved. It was when I got down to start writing my notes out and compiling what I thought of them, that's when suddenly I was like, oh wow, I have a lot of negative opinions of this. And in Good Omens was the same way as this, where I enjoyed the hell out of reading that book. Yeah. And there were a bunch of scenes in that book I like, but when I sit down to analyze it, suddenly it's like, I didn't really like this. I don't think this works very well. I wish they would have done something different here. And we like books, guys. I don't we spend 2.5 hours every week like praising the glory that is Worm. So we like these things. It's just these are 2 books that just so happen to the individual parts were better than the sum of those parts.
Yeah. And there were definitely things that we could pick out that didn't work, but I think we gave it a pretty fair shake because we talked about a lot of the elements that were interesting and novel and what they could mean, and it's fun to talk about that even if it's not entirely clear what he's trying to say at all times. Maybe that's, to be super generous, like maybe he's doing that on purpose. Maybe he's trying to prompt you to say, okay, well, what do you think I mean?
Yeah,
and you think it through.
Absolutely. All right, so let's open this up. Guys, if you have any questions, if you have anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention, we're opening up the floor to you guys now, so get typing, and we will answer and comment on whatever we can. And now I have to sit here awkwardly because there's a slight delay between what I said and this. F. Joe K. in the Discord says that the next book should be the official novelization of Suicide Squad. No.
Which exists.
I can't believe that exists.
There's a novelization for everything.
Yeah, that's true. It's easy cash grab. Yeah.
I
wonder how you feel about yourself as a writer. Like, if you're the novelization guy.
Yeah.
Presumably you're getting paid, and that's nice. So one of my favorite books is Blindside, and that author wrote the novelization for Crisis 2. Oh wow.
The video game. And it was really good, by the way.
Yeah. I think that maybe that's the true artist will look at that as a challenge. Is how can I take this thing and create a book from it that's better than the story
Yeah.
as it existed.
Now, in that particular case, it was funny because that the story of that video game is like exactly the kind of story that he would have written anyway, with all kinds of like post-human concerns. So,
Joe says there's no novelization out there for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
well, sounds like an opportunity.
Well, there you go, Matt. Get on that. Write that.
All right.
You can fix it. No, there's no fixing it. There's no fixing it. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions.
Yeah, we stalled for quite a while.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any. So, you guys feel free to inject questions while we wrap
Yeah.
up, I guess.
Yeah, Kevin brings a good point here that the story kind of tends to halt progress to issue exposition dumps, and I think it absolutely does that. There's one in the climax of the story where there's a whole chapter where Lyra finally meets her father, and it's literally just him sitting down in front of a fire explaining the plot to us. That does happen quite a lot, and that's I think it's. Oh yeah, Lupin asked us about Balloon Man, Lee Scoresby, yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk about him at all.
We didn't talk about him at all. We didn't talk about the Egyptians at all, too. And I think there's a reason for that, which is that they all felt very self-contained and tangential.
Yeah.
Like I liked Lee Scoresby. I liked Father Coram, and the other Egyptians. I thought there was actually some nice emotional stuff with the Egyptians and her relationship with them. But like,
Yeah.
it's just so transient. It's like story-wise, she's almost just like using them to get around.
Yeah.
And it sounds, and it very often feels like a one-sided relationship where like for some reason everyone loves her and wants to take care of her, and she's like almost a brat toward them sometimes.
Yeah, like the Ma Costa stuff, like where she was the one that really watched over her. That like she was the servant that was spying on them for her, and then like she was basically her surrogate mother.
Yeah.
And like you could tell that she deeply loves this child and cares for this child, and Lyra never really reciprocates that in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah.
I think she loves
it. Yeah.
I think she likes the Egyptians very much, and she feels more at home with them in some of the earlier parts of the book than anywhere else. But yeah, it's kind of weird. Like the emotions in this book are kind of weird at times. Like Lyra very clearly loves Pan. She very clearly loves Roger, and she cares for York a lot. But the ones that you think there would be there is kind of weird.
Yeah. So, and this is the kind of thing that feels intentional now that I think about it. But like, I actually care about and like Lee Scoresby and Father Coram and Jornik Bernison and like 5 more side characters more than I care about and like the protagonist. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure why.
I mean, part of that could just be that you don't relate to an 11-year-old girl as much as you relate to a Texan balloon man. Which, I mean, it's basically you, Matt.
Yeah, that's true. But but I think you could probably write an 11-year-old girl that I would relate to. It's just that this wasn't that.
Yeah. That one weirdo asks, how do we feel about some of the rules of the world explained so late? Like the great taboo of you cannot touch daemons, that you can't do it. That doesn't bother me as much because that's the type of thing that is just so generally understood that, like, I don't think the story would think to explain it.
Yeah.
Until it actually happens and someone breaks it.
It didn't like matter so much other than being like a signal of something in that moment.
Yeah. Rachel asks, what would our daemon... damn it. I almost made it through the whole thing without saying daemon. What would our demon be? Matt, what would your demon be?
Armored bear.
That's cheating. You can't do that.
That was what I was thinking the whole book. I assumed that at some point someone's demon would become a polar bear because you spend all the time around polar bears. It's got to occur to you. It's got to occur to your soul.
It was the opposite, Matt. A human became the demon for a polar bear.
Well,
kind of.
I mean, it just seems like you would want to have a giant polar bear.
I mean, I I agree, but I don't think you have that option. So could it? Yeah, that's interesting. Could a demon turn into a polar bear? Like, could that be possible? Like, obviously, it would not be a Panzerbjorn, but could it?
So another thing that confused me was sometimes her demon would turn into like a lion briefly, or at least that's what it said. And I'm like, wait a minute. So what are the restrictions? Because if it can turn into a lion, then how does the monkey ever like physically dominate it? Why doesn't it turn into a lion?
Yeah, the changing seems to have no spatial limit because it turns into a moth, and then it can turn to as big as like a lion or a tiger or something.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh no, it's scrolling by. Some more talk about Azrael is evil, which he is. I like Connor's point here that the end of the story, we see the breakdown of Lyra's simplistic view. At the beginning of the story, she basically says Mrs. Coulter is evil, and therefore Azrael, who is against her, must be good, but then Azrael is also shown to be evil, and it forces Lyra to confront her beliefs. However, also, she literally decides that dust must be good because the bad people don't like it.
Right.
So that's kind of the same thing.
Kind of the same logic, yeah.
Yeah.
A dolphin demon, yeah. That's what I want. I want a demon that just flops around all the time and I have to
Yeah, they mentioned that, right? Like, how shitty would that be? It's like, well, now I have to live on the sea forever.
Fish demon.
Yeah. And Bobby's saying there were a few references that Pan got as big as he could. Okay. So I don't think there's any clear limit on that, but I think maybe it's right. Maybe it's a baby lion.
Maybe. I mean, that's the thing is some people have like full-grown wolves, and some people have Azrael has the snow leopard, which is pretty big.
It's like a full-grown snow leopard. Yeah. All right. Any more questions before we wrap this thing up? Actually, I'm just going to start the wrap up, and then we can answer your questions. So next month, we did have a donor at the actual Superman level, but they did not get me their selection in time. So we're going to do that person's selection later. So which means this month we have to vote again. So we've got some books here as choices. You can see them up on the screen. We have Liminal States. That's Matt's choice.
Yep.
The Secret Place. That's my choice. Carrie by Stephen King, Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and The Player of Games by Ian M. Banks. These are all choices by you guys. If you picked something and did not see it here, I'm sorry we couldn't get all of them, but the poll is going to go up basically as soon as I stop the stream, so you can go jump in, and it'll be open until Monday. We'll announce the winner Monday, and then we'll get reading. The time for the next one of these, Matt, I think we're going to do Friday, November 10th.
Okay.
I'm interested, those of you that are here, obviously Friday works kind of well for you. Would it be better for another weekday? Please let me know. And we can change it around. I think we've just been doing Friday because our days matter on the week are taken up by a lot of other podcasts we're recording. So Friday is normally one of the only days we can do it. But if that works better, if we can get more people. I mean, we had quite a good turnout this week. I'm very happy with that. But if we can get more people in there, that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, complaints, anything you didn't think we covered, anything if we get some stuff that weren't covered, we might start next month by going back and just seeing some of the emails and questions we got. So you can reach out to us at dailyplanetfilms@gmail.com or on Twitter at dailyplanetfilms. All right. So guys, this was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for tuning in. I love doing this live. I like having these people. I like having you people like live talking to us. And I'm gonna have to get used to talking and reading at the same time because I end up like pausing as I'm reading or as I'm talking because I read what someone says. But I think this is a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you guys coming out. If you're listening to the podcast after the fact, hopefully you can come attend next time too. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we got 16 people watching, so that's awesome.
And Mike mentions that he'd be interested in hearing more talk about themes. I think one of the biggest problems I had was that I had a lot of trouble parsing the themes of this book. They're there, but some of them were not clear. Some of them were kind of confusing, and I had a lot of difficulty with this novel and trying to figure out what Pullman is precisely trying to say.
And I think a lot of we talked about this earlier, and I think our consensus was like a lot of the themes sort of seem to become crystal clear after you've read all 3 books and you understand this is like a coming of age story, and this about this girl growing up and entering adulthood and what it means to enter adulthood and what is the difference between childhood and adulthood. And it's like, well, okay, in this book she barely showed any indication of exiting childhood, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't really enter adulthood until the end of the 3rd book. So
I haven't looked anything up on this, but part of me wonders if Pullman wrote this to be 1 book and his publishers basically said, "That's too long. You gotta chop it up." It feels like one of those.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it. If you like what we do here at Daily Planet and want to see more of it, head on over to our Patreon. It's patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms, and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. You get access to a private Discord server where people are talking right now about the books that we should read. Even people that are not on the chat or on the stream right now are talking.
Yeah.
And also you get the ability to vote on the other books. You get so many other cool things. It's awesome. We really appreciate every one of you that's a patron right now. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, we sincerely do.
Yeah, and I guess that's it for us this week, Matt. I don't know if you have anything else. We're gonna stop the recording right now and say see you next month with whatever book that is.
Yeah. If you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us, you can find us on Twitter at Daily Planet Films or email us at dailyplanetfilms@gmail.com.
Yep. See you all next month. Yeah, I totally did ignore your question about shipping because I'm not answering that question. Dark Glass, I've never read Secret Place, so I have heard very, very good things about Tana French, and I've been wanting to check out Tana French for a long time. So this felt like a good excuse to do it.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell everyone that I read the first book in that Tana French series, and it like psychologically devastated me for like a year. Just like shattered me, and I had to put myself back together. So that's my experience with Tana French books. So I'm actually extremely apprehensive about it.
Well, I've always wanted to see you have an emotional breakdown live on camera. So it seems like if you want to see that, vote for The Secret Place by Tana French.
That'll be some good television.
All right. So yeah, I mean we're done recording, but we're gonna. I'm wide awake, so I'm gonna hang out. If you guys just want to chat for a while.
Yeah, I can hang out a little bit, but I do have to pack.
Oh yeah, Matt's leaving tomorrow. Everyone, look how dedicated Matt is. That he's here right now. He's leaving tomorrow.
Yeah, I actually have to leave early in the morning tomorrow, and I have done almost nothing in terms of preparing. So yeah, Matt, I'll be here for a little bit longer.
That's just completely irresponsible, Matt.
I know. Okay,
guys, I'm about to press publish on the vote. We're doing the vote for patrons only, so if you are in here and not a patron, sorry, that's one of the benefits from being a patron, but it is live now, so you want to start voting.
Yeah, you can just give us $1 and fix that problem.
There you go. Oh man, that was fun. That's good.
Yeah.
It's always like we went way longer this time than I thought we would.
Yeah. There's always more to. I think we've always experienced this where we're like, I just don't know if I have that much to talk about, and then almost any book is dense enough where you can justify talking about it quite a bit if you just kind of remember everything that's in it.
Yeah, guys, every week on any of these podcasts, the 10 minutes before the podcast, I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. Am I good at this? What am I going to say? Do I have to talk for? And then you just start talking, and then it just kind of comes, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was cool that there's so much really good feedback today. That really helped.
Yeah. I mean, you guys were awesome. Thank you so much for participating. If you don't know anything about any of the books, like read the synopsis and pick the one that sounds the most interesting, and then you can read along with us. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Kevin, are you talking about the difference between Good Omens and Golden Compass? Awesome, people are voting already.
Yep, we got one vote.
I think it's gonna be really funny when the Ton of French Books wins because
I admitted to being terrified.
Yeah. I love when books have that kind of serious effect on me, though. I mean, it's not a great way to feel, but
yeah.
The poll is on Patreon, so if you're a patron, you should have gotten an email, or you can just go to our homepage and it'll be here. Let me just throw it in the chat because that's something I can do. You have to make sure you are logged in to your Patreon account because it's a patron-only poll. So I don't know if PETA's even on the stream, but PETA Enigma is in Discord asking if he can do nonfiction books. And the answer to that is no. We're doing fiction only with this.
Yeah.
That would be, I think, very boring.
Yeah.
I read nonfiction all the time. I like nonfiction a lot, but
yeah, I read it too. It's just like it's not really what we're doing here.
No, yeah, it's different. Speaking of nonfiction and movies involving or books involving spirituality, I'm reading a book right now called Movies Are Prayers, which is I just started it as soon as I finished Golden Compass. It's super interesting. It's one of the guys from Film Spotting, the Film Spotting podcast, where he like uses movies to describe spiritual experiences. Not like he's not like talking about specific Christian movies or specific spiritual movies, but just like normal movies that cause him to experience like spiritual like things, like how powerfully it affects him. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a good topic.
Yeah. Dark Glass, what's pseudo nonfiction? What does that mean? Oh, my voice is... I always forget to get water.
Yeah.
Oh, I still have some of this left.
I usually finish whatever quantity of water I brought in like 30 minutes, and we talk for 2 more hours.
That is the problem with live streaming, is we can't go, let's take a water break.
Yeah.
I can hear your fish. I hear your fish.
Yeah.
Oh, The Disaster Artist is something I really want to read.
I don't know what that is.
The Disaster Artist is a book about the making of The Room.
Oh.
And they're making that into a movie.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I've heard of the movie. I didn't know it was a book.
Yeah.
Sounds fun.
I can't wait for the movie. I'm very excited. For those of you that are Kryptonians and above that get access to our monthly Q&A things that we're starting now, I sent you a Patreon post the other day asking for questions. So if you are at that level or above and want to participate in a Q&A, we're going to do... My strategy here is every time we get enough questions, we're going to do a Q&A. So if you reach that level... submit your questions so we can do it. Is My Immortal shorter than... Well, I don't think... Our cutoff's not 125, is it? I thought it was higher than that.
I'm not sure, but I think he's joking because I've heard that My Immortal is like the worst thing in the world.
Oh. Well, I don't get sarcasm in text.
Apparently it's a Harry Potter fan fiction known for incomprehensible narrative and constant digressions, centering on a 17-year-old vampire female.
Well, that sounds like something I just don't ever want to read, ever.
Notably, her romantic relationship with Draco Malfoy.
Oh my god.
She goes back in time to try to defeat Voldemort. Sounds pretty good.
That sounds great. Dark Glass... like an autobiography, I just don't know. I just don't know how that would work.
Kevin, the books are largely they're all sort of like crime novels, and they involve the same characters, but not in a way where it's like linearly progressing from story to story, is my
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah. Like there might be references to other characters that are the main characters of different books, but I think each book has their own like separate main character that exists in the same world, but I don't think I have been told you don't have to read them in any particular order.
Yeah, me too. And my mom has read a few of them, and that's what she says also.
No, Lupin, your book didn't get picked this time as part of the poll, just because we just did we just did your book. But we're keeping all these suggestions. I've got them starred in my email, so when we go back to votes, we're gonna pull old suggestions as well. You know what sucks? These headphones. I hate them. They hurt my ears.
I'm sorry. I think I'm gonna get some over-ear headphones.
Yeah. I am looking at new headphones right now because I had Beats and they broke. These are my wife's, and I am never buying Beats ever again. Ever again.
Yeah, I think that would kill me. I don't think I could wear what you're wearing right now.
I can't make my head smaller. My head is its size. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, like, it's my ears are big. So these, like, I like the ones that go over my ears.
Yeah, are normal people, like, do normal people, are they able to, like, crush their ears for hours at a time and have it not be really painful? Because for me, that's really painful.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Sennheisers. I looked at Bose has some great noise canceling ones, and Sony apparently has some noise canceling ones. They came out with some wireless noise canceling ones that rival Bose and Sennheiser. So that's what but they're outrageously expensive, so I'm not going to buy them until they go on sale or get much cheaper. Because I spent so much money on stupid Beats that broke in a year, and I will never do it again. I'll never do it again. But
Yeah.
these, the bad thing about these is they don't, for whatever reason with these, it doesn't play back my own voice. So I don't hear myself as well. And it's really annoying. I don't like this at all.
That's the reason why I have these $4 Radio Shack earbuds, is that I had too many expensive things crap out on me.
Yeah. Yeah. Man. I'm getting tired.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to go start packing for my trip in a few hours.
Yeah, you have to go out of town now
Yeah.
because that's what you have to do.
Yep.
Yeah, guys, I think we're gonna shut this down. It's getting pretty late for us, but guys, this was a lot of fun. And if you came in late, I mean, you can watch the whole thing again on YouTube as soon as we stop. But we're also gonna try to release the podcast whenever I get up tomorrow and edit it and release it. So it'll be out. It'll be out soon in podcast form. So
yes.
Yeah, vote on the poll if you're a patron. Email us if you have any suggestions on how to better organize this. We're new to this whole thing, so we take suggestions, we take criticism, we take all that. Please send it our way. We will take it. Just be mean, please.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Good night, everybody, or good morning, Raitul.
And we'll see you. I don't know.
Next
You'll
month.
hear us. You'll hear us
Yeah.
again. If you've listened to our other podcasts, you'll hear us again next week. But
Yeah.
you'll see us again next month.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.